Welcome to the video about the Scotch opening. My name is Saro Cacciaturi. I'm a 2100 federated chess coach and chess instructor. The Scotch is one of the most open openings where the center basically dissolves early on. So therefore it is very straightforward and both sides don't have a lot of time to do some random H or A pawn moves, so you are not going to move the pawns on the edge a lot. At least this is how it's supposed to be, and therefore it's a great weapon on a lower level, let's say up to 2000, because a lot of players just do not know how to handle it. In order to understand it, we will just go through some sidelines, and then we will look at some main lines and also study an entire master game. So what's the Scotch? The Scotch is the move d4 here, and usually black should take, then the knight takes. And on this way, black again has some chances to play other stuff like d6 or even f6, but f6 is even worse than d6. And why? We will investigate this now. So let's go and start with f6. So here, after f6, white can just play bishop to c4, and black is not going to castle kingside anymore. After e takes d4, knight takes d4. Let's say black decides to go knight g e7, and comes knight c3. White develops normally, and as you can see, this f6 pawn is causing trouble to the black player, because the knight cannot be developed to its normal square, and the knight on e7 is a little bit less active. And also the king is weakened. So let's say knight takes d4, queen takes d4, and the knight goes to c6 with tempo. Now we can play queen to e3, and black basically has two moves, something like knight e5. But don't worry, we just go bishop to b3, and later we will play f4. Let's say bishop b4 and then f4. And if bishop b4 is played earlier, then we just castle, and again, sooner or later, f4 is going to be played, and white will try to open up black's king, or the pawn structure in front of the king. So as you can see, this f6 approach is not very fruitful, and neither is it good. So just to repeat, we go after f6, we go bishop c4, so black cannot castle kingside anymore because there are a lot of discovery attacks. Then we put our queen on e3, and bishop b4 is also not much good, because whatever happens, black has issues, cannot castle, and yeah, f4 is going to be played. This is just a move which is played almost in any variation here, and this is good for the white player. Then bishop e3, and as we said, the king has to castle queenside if it castles, so we can focus our attack on the queenside. And here, black is having a lot of troubles here, and you don't really want to have black here. The king is not really safe because the bishops are pointing towards the pawns in front of the king, and this pawn might be pushed. The rook is vis-a-vis the queen. A lot of tactical motives you don't want to be involved in, basically. Bishop e6, try to exchange off the bishop, but doesn't really work, because here white is advancing far too fast, and the black king is far too vulnerable. Just play something like a5 or prepare a5, and black has a horrible position. So I said, this variation is just bad. So f6, I'm sure you will have no problems to counter. But what about d6? d6 looks more reasonable. Pardon me. And here I have a special suggestion for you. You can play what we have already suggested, bishop c4 for example, or you go d5, and we want to go deeper into d5 here. Bishop c4 was suggested in the Italian opening part. So after d5 here, usually the knight goes to e7, and now white plays c4. After knight f6, knight c3, g6, we have basically a transposition into the Mar del Plata variation of the King's Indian defense. It's one of the most dynamic openings in chess, but white always has a slight advantage. Bishop g7, and now I will guide you through some ideas. So this is basically the starting position. White has a lot of different ideas, but there is a very interesting line with b4, and this is also the most popular line. After b4, black can counter with a5, for example, but here you just take and then play a4, and depending on what black plays, you are either going to play c5 yourself or not going to play c5 because black plays it. So the only variation where you are not going to play c5 as white is when black plays it, and then you go rook a3 to get the rook to a protected square, and later watch out how you can make progress, but you have a nice position here. Another way to treat this position is knight e8, then you go bishop e3, f5, and you go c5 with white. And this position is very dynamic, and both sides are fighting. And for example, d takes c5 and then knight d2, and the point is that this move is not winning a piece but inviting knight c4, then the rook has to move and the bishop will later just capture on c5, and black has already a bad position here, in my opinion. And the other line is knight d7, and also here we just go bishop a3 and later bishop b4 to attack the rook, and once the rook is away, we play knight g5, and if black allows us, we will later play c5. If he plays knight c5, we can also just take here, and white obviously has the better pawn structure. So let's go back. So here you can either go bishop c4, which we have already looked into, or you just play d5. I wanted to give you an alternative here so you can decide what you play. To be honest, when I was designing my repertoire, and it's a repertoire basically for players up to 2150 or maybe 2200, I try to limit the variations so I can focus on other parts of the game. And this would be also my suggestion for you. Here, bishop c4, but in case you need to play something else or you want to play something else, you have this d5 weapon. Now let's move on to our next part, to the main part. So after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, e takes d4 is the main line. This move is the main line. Now comes knight takes d4, and there is this move, knight takes d4, but it doesn't have the best reputation. It is played by strong players, but it's not that good. White just develops normally, and the queen of white is centralized but cannot be attacked, because the knight which could attack the queen was just exchanged on d4 and the queen took it. And I believe this variation is just good for the white player. And it's not very logical. Why should black waste time, invite the white player's queen towards the center and then lack the counterplay? So the main line here, or one of the main lines, is knight to f6, but what we are going to look at first is bishop to c5, and the reason is because there is a nice trap here. We will go bishop e3, and now if black thinks he just develops normally, white has the very strong knight takes c6, which is a discovery attack. Now let's go back for one moment. So the bishops are basically vis-a-vis, and now knight takes c6, attacks the queen. Black is forced to take the knight, and now the bishop on c5 just drops off. White has won a piece, and black is just losing. So this is not possible. Keep this in mind. Some opponents fall for this. So therefore, in this bishop c5 variation, when white goes bishop e3, the right move is queen to f6. Looks a little bit strange, is a little bit strange, but this is the right move, because it's attacking the knight, and here you see there's no attack, and the bishop can later take here, for example. So everything is fine. The main line here is c3. So this is my suggestion. We go with c3, and then knight g to e7, bishop c4, knight e5. A very important move because black wants to play d5. So bishop to e2, and before d5 we first play queen to g6, attacking this pawn. Now white castles, and black can play d6. Instead of queen g6, also d5 is playable, and d5 is generally a very good idea, and possible many variations. So g6, and surely also here something you can look into, but you would be forced to also look into these things. So make sure when you play d5 that you don't run into too much trouble. And this queen f6 line, we don't need necessarily to enter. If you don't like this, you can also just play knight to b3, which is another very solid line. So this is the queen f6 line, or the bishop c5 line to be more precise. Yeah, so either knight b3 or bishop e3. My suggestion is just go bishop e3, make your opponent think a little bit, because chances are that black will fall for this, and playing these queen f6 positions, in my opinion, are very hard for black. So let's just look into this knight f6 idea. So now white has basically a couple of choices. White can just go knight to c3 and then bishop b4, then you take on c6 and later play bishop d3. But in my opinion, taking on c6 immediately, the way Kasparov used to play this, is a very ambitious way and still a very good way. So b takes c5, and white goes e5. Now the question is what black should do, and black should really play something like queen to e7 first. It pins the pawn to the king, and therefore the pawn cannot take the knight. Then comes queen to e2, and now suddenly the knight is hanging because there is no pin anymore. So the knight has to move. White still harasses the knight, attacks it again with a pawn, and again black has a pin. With bishop to a6, the pawn on c4 is pinned, cannot move. Now we will take a look into the game Dmitry Kolas against Alexander Donchenko, which Dmitry Kolas won in just 21 moves with a brilliant attack. So b3, which is a main line here, g6, still everything normal, and now bishop to a3, attacking the queen, and the queen doesn't have many good squares, so the best black can do is knight to b4, and follows bishop to b2. Here, of course, white is already threatening with e6, so you really want to neutralize this threat with bishop to g7. White plays a3, then comes knight to d5 back. So don't worry, the bishop is pinning the c4 pawn. The c pawn cannot take the knight, obviously, because otherwise the queen would drop. This is not working for white. So therefore knight to d2 is played. And now black should play something like castle, and white castles queenside, for example rook fe8, queen f3, with a very interesting position here where white sacrifices a pawn but gets a very interesting position. Unfortunately, taking here doesn't really work because there's knight takes, and it looks like white's king would be a little bit exposed, so these things might be premature. So let's go back. In the game instead, knight to f4 was played, and this is already a crucial mistake, and black is really in trouble after the very strong queen to e3. The knight has to move. Knight goes to e6, then follows knight to e4. This looks like a weakening of this pawn on e5. However, black cannot capitalize on it. Black castles, white castles, and now black commits the next very inaccurate move, c5. Now white follows up with knight to f6. And the problem here is that the king is in check, and also there is this attack against the d7 pawn. So if something like this was played, then the rook can take on d7 and the queen is basically trapped. Not a very pleasant position, if you ask me. So let's go back. So therefore, black took on f6. But now we will see another problem after e takes f6. This square is very weak, but also this king is very weak. g7 might be weak. The knight on e6 is defending it. And it's not the most stable piece, because white later might put a rook on e8, e1, sorry, and then exchange it for the knight, and then g7 would be very weak. This might be one idea. Or the idea Dimitri Kolos chose. After queen d8, he went queen h6, and it looks like this is the threat. After king h8, Kolos followed up with rook to d3. A very nice move. And now look at this king. It doesn't have many squares. So black wanted to get ready to deal with threats against this knight, because the knight needs to cover the square, otherwise white would checkmate black. So rook to g8 was played, but this invites a very beautiful mating combination, but also a very easy one, or very short one. Queen takes h7, check. Believe it or not, but black can't do anything against the mate. And here white won by resignation, because after king takes h7 there is simply rook h3 mate, and the king cannot move, you cannot interpose, the attacking piece cannot be taken. Here black had already resigned earlier, so this position didn't occur, but it was forced. There was no way for black to prevent this. So let's go back and repeat or discuss some things here. As you can see, the active appearing knight to f4 turned out to be inaccurate or a mistake here. And here already black has a very difficult position. So therefore it's better just to castle and try to play against the e5 pawn. This is usually the way to go. And to repeat the other variations, after knight c5, as mentioned, I would just go knight e3, bishop e3, pardon me, and then queen f6 and c3. And white has very good chances here, I believe. Black has also chances, but playing with a queen on f6 might turn out as not so pleasant for the black player. But of course also white must watch out for the g6 ideas here. So this was the video about the Scotch opening. I hope you liked it. So now you have a choice between the Italian and the Scotch for white, and for black between the French and the Scandinavian. In all these videos I tried to suggest a particular line, very concrete lines. However, in order to understand openings, you should go through some master games and try to dig deeper. These videos are meant to be a starting point, not the end of the journey. Good luck playing these openings.